All right, are you guys all ready? Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Senator Julie Mayfield. I am the senator from District 49, which is Asheville and Buncombe County. Those of us in the room today have just come from the North Carolina Supreme Court, where the justices heard arguments in a case involving the city's removal of the Vance Monument in downtown Asheville. And we have some folks who'd like to say more about that. And to lead us off, I'm going to introduce Jake Sussman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mayfield. Good morning and welcome to today's media briefing following this morning's oral arguments in the North Carolina Supreme Court in the Society for the Historical Preservation of the 26th North Carolina Troops versus the City of Asheville, North Carolina, and Buncombe County, North Carolina. My name is Jake Sussman. I'm Chief Counsel for the Justice System Reform Project at Southern Coalition for Social Justice, and I'll be moderating today. This case involves a challenge to the decision to remove the Vance Monument located in Buncombe County, which honors former slaveholder, Confederate Colonel, and white supremacist Zebulon Vance. Community members in support of the monument's removal are here to speak about this historic moment. More than 2 years ago, local elected officials voted to remove the monument from the center of Asheville. This came after a joint resolution by the city, the creation of a task force, and extensive community engagement. After that decision was made, a Confederacy special interest group, the Society for the Historical Preservation of the 26th North Carolina Troops, filed a lawsuit in an effort to thwart that effort. Superior Court Judge Alan Thornburg dismissed that lawsuit, finding that the plaintiffs had no contract and no standing to bring their claims. The plaintiffs appealed, and the North Carolina Court of Appeals reached the same conclusion. The Court of Appeals unanimously held that the plaintiffs had failed to establish that there was a breach of contract, had failed to establish standing under the law. The core legal question under consideration this morning before the Supreme Court is whether this Confederacy special interest group has any legal standing or any right to bring this lawsuit. As I just detailed, every court that has considered this case and its facts have rejected that claim. To put this into some broader context, communities across North Carolina have been actively seeking to remove Confederate monuments when local government bodies, whether in Asheville, Winston-Salem, Edenton, or elsewhere, have taken steps through local political process to remove or relocate these statues. Special interest groups like the 26th North Carolina Regiment or United Daughters of Confederacy have time and again tried to interfere with the process. Those with the power to remove or relocate these monuments which celebrate those who sought to topple the United States government in order to maintain the institution of slavery, will be watching this case very closely. We'll have time for a few questions after we hear from some of our speakers, and we plan to send a recording of this briefing later today with media contacts available should anyone have any follow-up. It's my honor now to introduce our speakers. I'll name them all and then call them up in order. We will hear from Dr. Oralene Simmons, community member and former Vance Monument Task Force co-chair, Noel Nickle, a local Vance family descendant and executive director of the North Carolina Coalition for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, Jaelyn Miller, community lawyering fellow at Emancipate NC, and the Honorable Esther Manheimer, the mayor of Asheville. Again, thanks to the Honorable Julie Mayfield for this opportunity, and I'll ask Dr. Simmons.
I am a native. Thank you so much. I am a native of Asheville and the great-great-granddaughter of Joe Anderson, who was enslaved during Zebulon Vance's tenure as Colonel of the Confederate Army, North Carolina 26th Regiment, and Governor of North Carolina during the Civil War. The Vance Monument was built in 1898 directly in front of the courthouse, a symbol of power, where a few years before, enslaved people had been sold on the steps. When I was young, It was where the white-only bathrooms and water fountain stood. Like every other African American who grew up in the era of Jim Crow's law, I suffered the indignities of America's racism. Over the years that followed, I have worked to bring people together rather than set them apart. Vance was a slave owner, opposed rights for blacks, and firmly believed that blacks' place was in servitude. Vance believed that a stream of African barbarians ran through the veins of blacks. In a letter shortly after the Civil War, he wrote, "There are indications that the radicals intend to force perfect Negro equality upon us. Should this be done, and there is nothing I can do to prevent it, it would revive an already half-formed determination in me to leave the United States forever." Over the years, multiple residents and some city council members have called to remove the monument as a symbol of white supremacy. Following the George Floyd protests, which were led by intergenerational coalition of black leaders, a joint resolution was made by elected officials on June 26, 2020, as a community commitment for racial justice. This included the establishment of a task force to address the Vance Monument. Serving as co-chair, I wanted to help the task force to find a common purpose in reimagining the symbolic structure. The near unanimous vote for removal was to allow a new message that is positive and inclusive to all people. The City Council and County Commissioners voted to accept the recommendations of the task force. Later ruling of the Superior Court and the Appeals Court upheld the near unanimous votes. This monument no longer has a place in our mountain town. We've moved on to the future, which is a place that will bring people together rather than set them apart. If this monument is left in its original form, rather than completely removed, it will continue to serve as a symbol of white supremacy to those most affected by its presence.
Thank you, Dr. Simmons. We'll hear from Noel Nickle.
My fourth great-grandmother, Jane Vance Davidson, was born November 30th, 1777. Her younger brother, David Vance Jr., was born 15 years later. And while Jane left North Carolina and went to East Tennessee to raise her family, David settled with his wife, Mira, in northern Buncombe County, where they had two sons. The youngest was Zebulon Vance. As a Vance family descendant, I am committed to being honest about my family history and working to remove monuments that glorify white supremacy. Because I was raised in East Tennessee, it wasn't until I moved to Asheville in 1996 that I began to learn about my family history. And I confess it took me more years to begin to fully understand the impact of the monument on my community and me. I learned that both sides of my family enslaved people, and that Zebulon Vance was my most powerful and racist ancestor. Dr. Simmons already referenced words that Governor Vance used to describe Black people. I am ashamed of those words. I am ashamed of his actions. And I am determined to use my voice to help repair the harm caused by his words and deeds, all of which is memorialized by the monument bearing his name. I submitted an amicus brief to the court in support of the City of Asheville's removal of the monument. In that brief, I referenced the legal phrase, stare decisis. Stare decisis means that lower court rulings, in this case, the Court of Buncombe, the Appellate Court of North Carolina, and in fact, previous rulings of this high court, our state Supreme Court, these rulings should be upheld. And if they are, it means that the monument will remain removed and will be destroyed. Of course, legal precedent is important. And after today's hearing, if the justices of our highest court abandon those earlier decisions, it will call into question the integrity of this court. But I'm here to say a little bit more about precedent. The Vance Monument was erected in 1898. That same year, white supremacists overthrew a racially integrated government and killed scores of Black people on the other side of the state in Wilmington, North Carolina. That is the culture in which this monument was erected. And like nearly all the more than 75 other Confederate monuments in North Carolina, the Vance Monument was built to uphold the prior precedent of systemic racism and violence against Black people. It was built to challenge and stand in the way of the culture and politics of Reconstruction. Today I'm here to uphold a new precedent, one that is rooted in justice, reparations, and the courage to dismantle symbols that do not represent a community where all may thrive. At the North Carolina Coalition for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, where I have the privilege of working, our tagline is creating a new vision of justice. The Vance Monument obscured, literally and figuratively, a vision of justice I deeply desire for my community in Asheville. Removing the monument does not erase my family's legacy. It is, however, an important step in repairing that family legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. We'll hear from Jaelyn Miller of Emancipate.
Good morning, my name is Jaelyn Miller, Jaelyn. I'm an attorney with Emancipate NC. I'm here today to sort of talk about, I think, the broader implications of this case. I think it's easy to view this case as simply being about a monument, but I believe this case has much bigger implications than simply being about the monument. In order for, as Noel just briefly touched on, the North Carolina Supreme Court to side with the special interest group in this case, they would have to overturn not only legal precedent, but they would have to demolish the doctrine of standing. They would have to ignore appellate rules of procedure that prohibit them from deciding on an issue that's not been properly preserved for the court. And I think the links and the legal gymnastics that they would have to go through to get to that decision should alarm every attorney in North Carolina, because it does go to the heart and the integrity of our judiciary, and as a result, to the democracy of North Carolina. I think this special interest group is part of a larger attempt to attack the democracy in North Carolina, and we see all over the state them attempting to do just that. So if the North Carolina Supreme Court sanctions that, it should be exceptionally alarming to everyone in the legal profession. We've seen it in cases, we have cases in Edenton, in Winston-Salem, in Asheville, where duly elected officials have made the decision that they are empowered to make. And this court, in overturning that decision, would be stepping in and overturning the will of the people and the will of the duly elected officials in Asheville. And that should alarm all of us. So I encourage every attorney, every person in the legal profession to pay very close attention to this case, to read thoroughly this case, and to pay very close attention to the actions of the North Carolina Supreme Court as it pertains to this case. Thank you.
Mayor?
My name's Esther Manheimer. I'm the mayor of the city of Asheville. I've been the mayor throughout this process and many years before that. And at first I'd like to thank all of the folks in Asheville and Buncombe County that served on the jointly appointed task force that Dr. Simmons referenced, which was appointed by the City Council and the County Commission to undertake the study of the ongoing challenge around the Vance Monument. And they took a very thoughtful approach. They listened to the community and they formed recommendations for the City Council and County Commission, which were adopted. And the monument was subsequently removed. Our city, like many cities, has values that are deep in our core, that are shared across our community, and I would offer have changed and evolved over time. And I think the issue around systemic racism that exists in our country has, for the white community, finally come to the forefront and is being confronted with true discussion. And we have come to understand that a symbol in the center of our community, which shouts out every day that some people are less than others, is not a value we embrace any longer. And so the removal of this monument is one of the first steps in healing our full community and moving together as one. The city's also taken, along with the county, other steps in this direction. We have jointly formed a reparations commission that is looking at the harms that have been imposed on our Black community and our minority community in Asheville and Buncombe County. And we're also looking at how to move forward together in a way that embraces everyone. We have a visioning process for the center of our city where the Vance Monument once stood that is embracing all of the community in terms of how we want to envision our city center. So I think that this has been one of the more challenging steps in that process. Obviously, we're here today because the North Carolina Supreme Court is hearing the case that involves this challenge. But I think this is a necessary step for our community. I do also think that it would be important and is important to thank all of the judges who have been considering this case along the way. Our own local Superior Court Judge, Alan Thornburg, and then a unanimous decision from the North Carolina Court of Appeals upholding the decision to dismiss this lawsuit at the trial court. And today we just left the oral argument in front of our Supreme Court, where we heard judges who were engaged and thoughtful and understood the gravity of this case and what it means for Asheville and Buncombe County. They asked good questions. They clearly had read the briefs and seemed to have a real understanding of what this case means to us and what it means for the state of North Carolina. So we're hopeful that in a few months we'll get a decision that will help Asheville and Buncombe County continue on its path to a new day that is a more inclusive and equitable community.
Thank you, Mayor Manheimer, and to everyone who spoke and who is here. If people have questions that they'd like to address to anyone, go ahead.
For anybody who wants to, just based on what you heard during the hearing, the questions the justices asked, what were your main takeaways about where you think this might actually be going?
I'll give one take on that. The court seemed to be strongly interrogating the plaintiff's counsel with respect to why they have any ability to bring this lawsuit, which is known as standing. There are sort of two main pieces of their claim. One is that they had a contract with the city of Asheville The court seemed to be honing in on the fact that that claim, which has been rejected, both the Superior Court and the Court of Appeals, has effectively and legally been abandoned by the plaintiffs. So in fact, they have no right to be making that argument at this point. And then they have made an alternative standing argument. Neither of those arguments, whether their membership has been established to be taxpayers or whether the statute concerning removal or relocation of the monuments would even apply. And so the court seemed to be very curious about what new arguments the plaintiffs are trying to fashion. And it did seem that they are focused on some procedural issues in the Court of Appeals decision that they might want to clean up, so to speak, but hopefully not disturb the lower court's rulings.
May I add? As a non-lawyer, I appreciate that the court was limited primarily to talk about who has standing in contract law this morning. I want to invite North Carolinians to realize that that is a smokescreen when we are working for equity and justice in communities across our state. And these symbols to the Confederacy stand in the way of that. And that is what we need to be talking about as communities.
Assuming, nothing changes with the decision you all made in terms of taking down the monument, do you have any plans for what to do with the base of it that's still there? And what happens to the monument itself in the years to come? Does it just sit somewhere in a warehouse, or do you guys have a plan essentially on what to do with this thing?
Yeah. Well, I think it's safe to say we're, sort of frozen right now while this case is still pending. The pieces of the monument are preserved, and the plinth is what it's called, is what's remaining. And so once we get a decision in this case, we'll be able to move ahead with what to do with the remaining pieces of the monument, the plinth, as it were. But the greater area that the Vance Monument is located in is called Pack Square, and that, you can look online, there is a visioning plan that's been adopted by the council for the future of that area, so that it, more fully encompasses the views of the entire community and is reflective of that.
Any other questions? Do you want to go ahead and close this up?
Thank you all for coming, and we look forward to the court's opinion.